This is a story about a young woman who was sucked into a powerful storm in a paraglider and survived. Ewa Wiśnierska was born on the 23rd of December 1971 in Nysa, a small city in southwestern Poland, nestled close to the Czech border and ringed by gentle hills. It was not a place that made you think of the sky. It was a place that made you think of the earth. Cobblestone streets, church spires, the quiet rhythms of a post-war provincial town. The mountains were close enough to see on a clear day, though, and Ewa grew up watching the ridgelines and wondering what lay beyond them. She was a restless child, bright and physical, drawn to movement and challenge. She was not the type to sit still. Friends and family would remember her as someone who always had to be doing something, always had to be pushing herself toward the next test. That energy followed her into adulthood and eventually out of Poland entirely. In 1991, as communism collapsed and Eastern Europe cracked open, Ewa made a decision that many of her generation made. She left. She moved to Germany, settling eventually in Aschau im Chiemgau, a small Bavarian town in the foothills of the Alps. The landscape there suited her, the mountains, the open meadows, the enormous skies. She built a life there. She learned the language. She made friends. She found work. What she had not yet found, not quite, was the thing that would define her. Ewa came to paragliding relatively late, beginning her training around the year 2000 when she was already approaching 30. In the paragliding world, this was not ideal. The sport's elite often started as teenagers, but Ewa had something that couldn't be taught, an almost preternatural instinctive feel for the air. Her instructors noticed it early. Where other beginners tensed up, second-guessing each gust and thermal, Ewa seemed to read the sky the way a musician reads sheet music. Intuitively, fluidly, without hesitation. She progressed with remarkable speed. Within a few years, she was competing nationally, then internationally. She joined the German national paragliding team, an unusual distinction for someone born in Poland, but her performances had made the decision easy. By the mid-2000s, she was regularly finishing on the podium at World Cup events. In 2004, she took first place at the International Swiss Open. She accumulated points, rankings, and respect. Paragliding, it should be understood, is not a passive sport. A paraglider is essentially a fabric wing, a canopy of nylon with lines connecting it to a harness in which the pilot sits. There is no engine, no motor. The pilot is entirely at the mercy of the atmosphere, riding thermals, reading cloud formations, making constant micro-adjustments with body weight and brake lines. On a good day, it is transcendently beautiful, drifting on invisible rivers of warm air above valleys and forests and mountains, the earth below reduced to a patchwork of color and silence. On a bad day, it can kill you. Ewa had already learned this the hard way. Just 6 months before February 2007, she had been involved in an accident that fractured her hip. A lesser athlete might have reconsidered the sport. Ewa recovered and returned to training. The fracture had not changed her relationship with the sky. If anything, having survived it, she felt more confident. She knew now what she was made of. By early 2007, she had reached the #1 ranking in the women's category on the Paragliding World Cup standings. She was at the peak of her career. Manila is a small town in the Liverpool Plains of New South Wales, Australia, far inland, away from the famous coasts, surrounded by flat farmland and low hills. It is not a name most people recognize. Among paragliders, however, it is legendary. The terrain around Manila, and particularly around Mount Bora, a modest peak rising above the plains, creates some of the most spectacular thermal conditions in the world. Hot air rises from the baked summer earth, generating powerful columns of lift that can carry a skilled pilot for hundreds of kilometers. It is a place that draws the world's best gliders. In February 2007, it was hosting the warm-up and preparation period for the 2007 World Paragliding Championships, scheduled for later that month. Ewa arrived as one of the favorites. She was training alongside hundreds of other elite pilots from across the globe: Australians, Europeans, Asians, Americans. The atmosphere was competitive but collegial. Everyone knew each other, or knew of each other. Among the crowd was He Jong-pin, a 42-year-old Chinese pilot with considerable experience. The routine was straightforward: fly as far as possible each day, learn the terrain, get a feel for the local weather patterns, prepare for the championship itself. It was training, not racing. The point was familiarity. The morning of 14th of February 2007 began like the others. Clear skies, warm air already rising from the plains, the faint smell of eucalyptus drifting across the launch site at Mount Bora. Around 200 paragliders milled about, checking equipment, stretching, chatting. Ewa went through her pre-flight checks methodically. She was meticulous about this, always had been. Then the briefing came. The race organizer looked out at the gathering and gave his assessment of the day. The weather was good, conditions were flyable, but by the afternoon there was a possibility of thunderstorms. The advice was clear. Be careful. Land before the weather turned. Ewa listened. She noted the warning. Then she set her GPS, clipped into her harness, and began to think about the route. The clouds to the north didn't look serious. Not yet. A few slate-gray formations were visible in the distance, but they seemed manageable, and the air between was fine. Many pilots would take off and assess. She was not alone in her decision. The Chinese pilot He Jiangpin launched around the same time, as did an Austrian friend of hers. For the first hour or so, everything was fine. Ewa followed the Mount Bora ridge heading north, the ground falling away beneath her, the plains spreading out in every direction. The view was extraordinary, as it always was. That feeling of open space and weightlessness, of being a moving point in an enormous and indifferent sky. She tracked her altitude and position on her GPS. The ground crew monitored her progress from a van below, checking in via radio. Then the ridge ended. Beyond it, the land flattened into open savanna, and with the ridge gone, Ewa became more exposed. There was nothing to shelter her from what was gathering to the north. What happened next unfolded with the terrible swiftness that weather so often produces. 2 thunderstorm cells had been developing independently to the north, one large, one smaller. In the time it took Ewa to cover the distance between the ridge and the open plains, the 2 cells merged. The smaller was consumed by the larger, and what had been 2 manageable-looking formations became a single colossal cumulonimbus system, 12 miles across and building rapidly upward. Many of the other pilots saw it and made the right call. They landed. Some had already turned back earlier, but Ewa, along with He Jiangpin and the Austrian pilot, was now deep enough into the flight that retreating was not simple. She tried to navigate around the storm. A paraglider in the hands of a skilled pilot can be maneuvered with considerable precision. It is not a passive craft. Ewa knew that flying beneath a cumulonimbus was dangerous. The updrafts beneath those clouds could grab a glider and haul it skyward. She tried to skirt the edges, to find a gap, to stay out of the cloud's shadow. The sky did not cooperate. In an instant, pilots describe these moments as sudden and absolute, the world changing between one heartbeat and the next. Ewa felt a lift like nothing she had ever experienced. Her variometer, the instrument that measures vertical speed, began screaming. She was climbing at 20 meters per second, 60 feet a second, 6 times her normal rate of ascent. She recognized what was happening. She had been caught by the storm's inflow, pulled into the base of the cumulonimbus. She tried her emergency maneuvers, spiraling, banking hard, shifting her weight, forcing the glider into a tight descending rotation that should deliver a pilot earthward at speed. Any other day, in any other circumstance, it would have worked. But the updraft was hauling her upward at over 30 meters per second. Even spiraling furiously, she was being lifted faster than she could descend. She managed to radio the ground crew. "I can't see anything," she told them. Her voice was still controlled, but only just. The line then cut off. Then the hailstones came. Orange-sized chunks of ice hurled at her from every direction, slamming into her face, her hands, her canopy. Her harness began to fill with ice and water. She was soaked within seconds. The darkness closed in. Inside the cloud, the sky turned black. The blackness was interrupted by constant lightning, blinding white flashes that filled her world without warning, accompanied by the concussive crack of thunder so close it felt like it was inside her chest. The temperature plummeted. Ewa was dressed for a hot Australian summer day. A flight suit, gloves, a helmet, none of it designed for the temperatures at altitude. By 3,000 feet, she was already feeling the cold bite at her extremities. At 20,000 feet, the temperature was around minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. At these heights, survival time without proper equipment is measured in minutes. She could do nothing. She had tried everything: the spiraling, the brake inputs, desperate attempts to collapse the wing and drop out of the cloud. Nothing worked. The storm was simply too powerful. A human being in a paraglider in the grip of a mature cumulonimbus is, as one witness later put it, like a leaf from a tree going up. She thought about her parents. She repeated to herself, dying is not an option. She told herself not to panic. She is not a religious person, but she prayed. She climbed higher and higher still, well past 24,000 feet, the previous record altitude survived by any paraglider, into territory that no one in her sport had ever experienced and returned from. The instruments on her GPS were freezing over. Her gloves were encrusted with ice. Her face was numb. At some point, she cannot say precisely when, the exhaustion and the oxygen deprivation overwhelmed her. Her body, deprived of the air it needed, simply shut down. It was not a dramatic collapse. It was quieter than that. A fading, a dimming, and then nothing. Ewa Wiśnierska lost consciousness at somewhere near 32,000 feet above the plains of New South Wales, higher than the summit of Everest, at the cruising altitude of commercial jets, alone in a storm that should have killed her. What happened next, how she came back down, how she woke up, how she landed, is another story entirely. But everything that led to that moment, the girl from Nysa, the move to Bavaria, the fractured hip and the return, the years of training, the #1 ranking, the warm February morning in Manila, the cloud that swallowed her whole, all of it had been building, without anyone knowing it, to those few final seconds before the darkness came. She had spent her life learning to read the sky. On Valentine's Day 2007, the sky read her instead. Ewa Wiśnierska survived. She regained consciousness at approximately 7,000 feet, descended through 45 minutes of unconsciousness, and landed safely with her flight suit encrusted in ice. He Zhongpin, the Chinese pilot caught in the same storm, was not so fortunate. His body was found the following day, nearly 50 miles from the launch site. Days after the incident, Ewa competed in the World Paragliding Championships, finishing second in the women's category. A documentary, Miracle in the Storm, was made about her experience in 2010.